So, we all know that when it comes to science and nutrition, things are constantly changing. And in fact, I remember growing up being in science class and hearing that it can change. And that is what we're dealing with today with our topic today, which is kidney health. Kidneys, very sensitive subject. There are people who are dealing with kidney disease. There are people who have donated their kidneys, all kinds of things with kidneys, right? So you want to be very careful with your kidneys. So today we're going to talk about the best nutrition when it comes to your kidneys, but keep in mind that it's still very, very important that you speak to your doctors when it comes to your kidney health. But today we're going to give you the best advice we can based on the latest studies. And of course, seems like plants are the king and queen. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. As you heard at the top, we are going to be hitting on the topic of kidney health. But as always, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share, particularly if you're watching us on YouTube. If you're hearing us on other platforms, engage however you can, whether that's to like or to comment. And as always, like I already said at the top, please always consult with your doctors or medical advisors when it comes to any type of diet or even fitness plan that you partake in. We are simply researchers, we are not your doctors. All right, Daddy. So let's get into it. I'm about to share my screen and we're going to get into our topic for today, which is kidney health. So let's get into it.
Right. I mean, kidneys, just to use an automotive analogy, that's that oil filter. That's the one that's filtering your oil. Your oil can get carbon deposits and all kinds of stuff in it. You have to clean it out. The same thing with your diet, and when you eat a lot of things, you have to have this filtration system, and that's what your kidneys do. That's why your kidneys really kind of work hard, to be honest with you. Your kidneys are constantly working and they have to be flushed. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. And there are certain things that you have to be careful of that you're eating that gets into your kidneys and cause it to really overwork.
And like I said at the top, um, plants may be king and queen here. And so let's get into it. We have this paradigm shift in renal care. The outdated paradigm, like I said, things change. In the past, it was avoid potassium at all costs. Again, speak to your doctors. But in general, it was outdated. The outdated paradigm is avoid potassium at all costs, prioritize high protein diets for aging muscle, and rely heavily on generic fluid restrictions. But modern science may have a different story. You want to get into that, Daddy?
Yes, what has happened, to be honest with you, it boils down to potassium, which we will get into later. But clearly, what you have to do, again, it says avoid potassium at all costs. Well, there's a study in 2024 and 2026 that says that's not necessarily the case. But if you're in a potassium diet that keeps that blood pressure down, which potassium will do, you got to keep that pressure down in your kidneys. Otherwise, your kidneys don't function as well. And you also have to watch what they call the metabolic acid load. Think about what I just said about carbon deposits in your car. You have to make sure that you don't have a high acid load. And of course, you have to continuously flush it to keep toxins out of it without straining the system. So in essence, that's what this is all about. But we're going to get into some exceptions with the potassium diet later.
Right. So we have pillar one, reducing the acid load with plant proteins. And that let's keep it real again. There's a lot of plant-based products out there. And we have done a show about plant-based ultra processed foods. And we have said they're not necessarily as bad as maybe some meat-based processed, ultra processed foods. But in general, your best bet is to really be on a whole food plant-based diet, particularly when it comes to your kidney health.
And that is very true. And animal protein tends to be higher in urea and acid load. That's the bottom line. And so if it's trying to clear out all this acid, the best way to counter that is through plant proteins and whole plants. You
Yes,
know,
whole
beans,
plants.
greens, mushrooms, berries, seeds, etc. Whole plants, okay? Whole plants, not ultra processed. Now you got to be careful with that. Not ultra processed. So you want whole foods. That is the critical distinction. Protective effects require whole foods.
Yes, you heard it here. That's the key. Whole foods. And we're going to break down a little later how eating whole foods, how that would work in your body, particularly when it comes to fiber. So we have pillar two, relieving the vascular pressure. We all look, I'm someone, I deal a lot with sodium because I'm a hot sauce queen. I love hot sauce. So I really need to pay attention to this because, I don't want high blood pressure or too much sodium in my body.
Yeah, and that's the key. Salt increases your blood pressure. You know, everybody knows that. I mean, that's pretty common knowledge. And potassium, one of the reasons you go back to that 2024, 2026 study, you know, potassium reduces the amount of sodium in your system. And so this is why ultra processed foods, and we're gonna beat this until you get it. Ultra processed foods are high in sodium, even though they may not taste salty, but they are high in sodium. And so that's a driver. That's why you have to get less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium in your diet. Otherwise, you could have a hypertension threat. In other words, that pressure in your kidneys increase, which causes kidney disease.
Yes, and that's been pretty clear. And then we have pillar three, the protein sweet spot. We have a lot of folks out here. They are on the keto diet, and I'm not knocking anyone's diet preference. I know some people swear by the keto diet. However, you do want to be careful and not overload with protein. There's a sweet spot, and that seems to be zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram. I guess you can get a little bit more detailed on that. I think that's
Well, you're
based on
talking,
your weight, correct?
yeah, and so it boils down to this, and we don't want to make this real complicated. On the left hand side there, if you're aging and you got what they call sarcopenia and you're wasting away in terms of your muscles, etc., you really want to eat more plants because the plants basically, the more plants you eat, the higher the per pound plants that you eat, then the less hypertension you're going to have, the less hyperfiltration you're going to have, less strain that you're going to put on those delicate renal filters, and they have all kinds of technical terms for them. We don't want to blow up your mind on that. But the bottom line is the sweet spot is plants. Eat your plants. And we'll get into some of the best ones to eat here shortly.
But this is also protein. Like this is a protein sweet spot.
Right. It's a protein sweet spot, and you get your proteins through plants, which is the best way to get them. Through beans, quinoa, beans and rice. Okay, those are some of the ones, and that's why you will see beans on the list for some of the foods that you should be eating when you have a kidney problem.
Or when you want to prevent a kidney problem.
Right. You definitely
Um,
want to do it to prevent. Oh yeah, and I think that's a very good point, Stacey, because we're going to get into a situation where if you don't prevent it, then you can't eat as much of these good foods as we're recommending because now you've got too much potassium in your system.
right. So the potassium progression paradox. Like I said at the top, things change when it comes to science and nutritional science, etc. It's just that's because you're talking about an area where studies happen, and they maybe look at one group of people and they thought, oh, this was the data, then it turns out not to be the data. And that's the case when it seems when it comes to this potassium and our kidney health, because in June of 2025, nephrology dialysis transplantation published a landmark study of over 4,000 patients. The patients in the lowest of potassium intake face 24% higher risk of their kidney disease worsening compared to those with the highest intake. So that created this paradox. What are your thoughts on that, Daddy?
Well, yes, it is. Because again, potassium is good for what? Pressure. Okay. And it keeps that pressure off your kidneys. But we're going to get into some exceptions to that later. But the bottom line is that potassium intake had low, if you were in the lowest quartile of potassium intake, you face a 24% higher risk of kidney disease. Now, keep in mind what potassium is also doing is it's keeping that salt out of your system, that sodium out of your system. And so, it's kind of a catch 22 for some people who can't take potassium, and we'll talk about that later. But the bottom line is potassium is moving that sodium out of your system, which is reducing that hypertension in your kidneys.
Yes, and that's the key. It's about there's a lot at play here, particularly when it comes to your body. We're learning that there's synergy and all these things. Um, so let's get into the sodium potassium seesaw, as you
Right.
are hinting
Lower
at. Yeah.
potassium, higher sodium. Okay. Urine excretion. Okay. So you really want to flush. You really want to flush. In other words, in healthy kidneys, potassium, I'm going to read this. Potassium acts like a natural antidote. It signals the system to excrete excess salt through the urine. Okay. Lowering systemic blood pressure. Keyword blood pressure. So that protects the vascular system. And the bonus is that the potassium-rich diets also prompt the kidneys to reabsorb calcium back into the blood, virtually eliminating the calcium oxalate kidney stones. That's why that study was so important. High potassium, lower sodium. High potassium, lower kidney stones. It's just that simple. However, there are exceptions.
Right. And now we get into mechanism two, alkalizing the blood to save muscle. I believe this matters the most as you get older. In particular, you see older folks, they seem to lose muscle mass. And some folks are saying that may not be just because you're getting older, it may be because of your kidney health.
Yeah, your kidneys are cannibalizing your muscles. Okay, it's turning because of the when blood turns acidic, it's cannibalizing your muscles so it can neutralize the acidity. Okay, in your system. Okay, it's trying to strike that balance. It's trying to get more alkaline. In other words, it's trying to get rid of the acidity in your system. So that's why plant-based diets again come into play. They are a powerful natural metabolic acid neutralizer. In other words, it neutralizes the acid in your system. So it is pushing you towards a more alkaline state, which means that you now can protect your muscles. How about that?
Yeah. I mean, looks like plant-based is the way.
All right, right. We're keeping this simple. This is not hard. Eat more
Yes.
plants, reduce the acid in your system, which means that means your kidneys aren't trying to cannibalize your muscles to act as a buffer. So, just eat your plants.
But here's where it gets a little complicated for people because again, a lot of folks were taught about too much potassium is bad for you, particularly your kidneys. But here is why when you have whole food plants, yes, they may have potassium, but there's this thing called the fiber trap. So let's get into that, Daddy.
Yeah, because the fiber, again, let's go back to some of the other podcasts that we talked about how fiber is so important because it traps a lot of things. Like we told you, you leave with a high fiber salad before you eat your meat. Again, and your highly saturated foods, because what happens is the fiber traps some of that saturated fat and takes it out of your system. Well, guess what? The potassium in whole plants is physically trapped within the cellular fiber because and so that keeps you from having too much potassium. So the structural trapping ensures a slow, sustained drip of potassium into your bloodstream and prevents this spike of potassium that can trigger medical problems. So it delivers more blood pressure benefits and virtually zero with zero risk. Again, that's why plants, I guess the best word to say is plant-based diets create a balance, if you will, in your system, even with potassium, because you can't have too much potassium. Okay. You can't have too much. And we will get into that later.
Which is again why you need strong medical guidance. Again, we say this at the top, we say this often, always consult your doctors, because we don't know your levels, but this is what the science is saying, this is what the research is saying. But yeah, I look at, our human bodies, they're just well designed. Some of you may not be religious, we are, or we're spiritual. I believe, God created a darn near perfect body, but we just have to feed it well.
Right. And created the food system to support it.
Yes. And so let's get into, I'm still sharing my screen. So we'll go to the next slide. So my dad has been speaking on this about you have the preventive shield versus the disease management. There's a difference here because if you do have kidney disease, you may have to have a different protocol.
Right. I'm gonna have to get deeper into this. Okay. Now, patients with advanced chronic kidney disease, those, especially those with stages 4 and 5, have to be careful with potassium because it can cause end stage renal disease, especially those with on dialysis, and potassium can build up between treatments. That's a medical condition. It can also be a problem for people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, which is a major risk for hyperkalemia. Now, hyperkalemia is too high
We
a
have it here.
potassium in your system. Right. And so then you have congestive heart failure, often managed with medications. Here's another kicker: prescription drugs. If you're taking prescription drugs that are adding potassium to your system, guess what? You can end up with too much potassium. And then you have Addison's disease, where the body doesn't produce enough uh, what they call aldosterone to regulate potassium. And then another kicker: people on low sodium diets trying to control that sodium use potassium chloride as a substitute, which can provide a massive hidden dose of potassium that is dangerous. So, this is where it gets complicated when you have these conditions. Okay? If you have these conditions, that's when it gets complicated.
Which is why, as you see here, it says you speak to a medical advisor. You get medical guidance. They are the experts. They went through many years of study. So if you are dealing with any of those particular diseases, you must consult your doctors.
Absolutely. So, here's a classic example of what we're talking about. If you're on a plant-based diet and you are basically, chugging along, you don't have a whole lot of underlying conditions. But the minute you cross over into underlying conditions, then all of a sudden you start taking prescription drugs and all of those things. And so some of these plant-based foods interfere with that. Okay. And so once you cross over into kidney disease, now all of a sudden potassium, which is preventative and very good for you, all of a sudden becomes a problem because you can get into hyperkalemia. So the key is to try to be as I say, as healthy as possible. And going back to all of those things that we told you about how to protect your kidneys and to how to have a healthy kidney, those are that's why plant-based diets are so important. They are very important to keep you from crossing over into advanced stage kidney disease, type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Remember, we really hit hard on diabetes, type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Now all of a sudden those become a problem for you when you're on a potassium diet. And because mainly because sometimes because of the medication.
Exactly. And let's get into some of the foods. These are foods that we have found Dr. Greger, who has studied many or looks at many studies, and he's a doctor, of course, and an expert in nutrition. These are the five powerhouse foods, I guess you could say, he feels for those dealing or trying to prevent kidney disease.
Right, right. You flax seeds, obviously, because of omega-3. Now, you can also get omega-3 from salmon. But Gregor is more plant-based, and you have to be careful with salmon because of contamination. Obviously, we're going to get deeper into hibiscus tea, but hibiscus tea literally helps you manage that blood pressure, and then remember that blood pressure, that pressure in your kidneys is what's damaging your kidneys to a large extent. And of course, beans and legumes, we Lord knows we pounded how important beans are to your overall health in terms of, especially in terms of providing you with that plant-based protein, giving you again that fiber, and of course then berries. Now you see berries are also low in potassium, but packed with anthocyanins or antioxidants. Again, so we're showing you diets that are kind of not as high in potassium because if you have chronic kidney disease and type 1 diabetes and all those other things, and you have to be concerned about your kidneys and potassium, you also want to have foods that are kind of low in potassium and not high in potassium. We actually saw one list that had a potato on it. And we said, wait a minute, you can't have a potato because potatoes are what? High in potassium. If you're chronic kidney disease, that you're not gonna eat that potato. Okay. And then of course, amla, Indian gooseberries is considered to be one of the highest antioxidant foods on the planet and protects kidney function by reducing oxidative stress. In fact, I put amla powder in my smoothies.
And I don't want to confuse the people because I know at the top I mentioned how potassium, the potassium paradox, but again, listen to the nuance. My dad was saying if you are dealing with kidney disease, yes, again, get your guidance from your doctor. You may have to, you may not can have too much potassium. But that study that I mentioned about the 24%, when you are in the preventive stage, they found that uh, potassium from whole foods, plant-based, may can lower your risk. Correct, Daddy?
That is
Of
correct.
kidney disease. Yeah.
Right, that is
When you
correct.
are in the preventive stage,
Right.
preventive. Yeah.
Right. If you don't have kidney disease, a potassium-rich diet is just fine. In fact, it is preferred. Okay. But if you're
According
not,
to the study. According to the
according to
study.
the study,
Yeah.
okay, okay, according to the study. So, but if you have chronic kidney disease and you have, again, a lot of people got type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So that's another issue. But the bottom line is consult with your doctor. But if you're eating mainly a plant-based diet, you should be fine.
Right. Now let's get into the triple threat of hibiscus tea. It has many layers, it seems, of how it can help you with your kidney health. Let's start with natural ACE inhibitor.
Well, ACE inhibitor means that ACE basically it causes your kidneys to have higher pressure. They call it bursting pressure. And so hibiscus tea inhibits that. If you go back to what we talked about with hibiscus tea and diabetes, uh, hibiscus tea actually blocks the conversion of a lot of high starches, like white rice and white bread, and from converting into sugar. Well, in your kidneys, it keeps your blood vessels relaxed and keeps it from getting what we call high blood pressure in your system. Okay, in your kidneys, and so that's one thing. And then in the then and then in the next issue, by the way, ACE is called angiotensin converting enzyme, which is an inhibitor and a diuretic, which helps to lower the blood pressure in your kidneys, and also is neuroprotective of your kidneys. Okay, that's
Was a
one thing.
mouthful, and that's a mouthful, which is why we call it ACE. anyway.
That's why we call it ACE. We're going to use an acronym here. Because I mean, that's a lot. Okay, but again, it goes back to what we talked about with hibiscus tea blocking starch from becoming sugar. In the kidneys, it blocks the enzyme from basically increasing your blood pressure, the blood pressure in your system. Okay, now the next thing it does is an antioxidant shield. Okay, it protects the kidneys through these little things called podocytes, PODO sites, which are little sieves cells that prevent protein leakage and uric acid flush. In other words, it's a whole lot of technical stuff. But anyway, it protects that. In other words, it's an antioxidant seal. Okay, so that's another thing that it does. I mean, we can't overemphasize that you need to just add it to your diet. To be honest with you, but it flushes out uric acid and modulates it modulates the urinary pH, actively preventing the crystallization of painful kidney stones. Again, kidney stones start to form when you have the wrong pH in your system. So it's an antioxidant shield. It prevents kidney stones and it keeps your blood pressure low. That's what you need to understand about the triple threat of hibiscus tea. So that's why we advise people to drink 24 to 32 ounces of hibiscus tea per day. This
There
is the
are there
triple
are
threat.
exceptions for some people. Again, I have to emphasize that when it comes particularly to women and their uterine health. But in
Right.
general,
There are,
yes,
yeah, there
hibiscus
are
tea is good.
exceptions. You are absolutely correct, Stacey. There are exceptions, but
Yes.
it is an elixir. If you
Yes.
can drink it because it helps. It's good for your health on so many different levels.
Absolutely. And again, as always, consult with your doctor, even if you are a woman dealing with that. Because apparently the science is that it really just depends on you, your body. It can react differently for some women, is really the point. Okay, so the daily hibiscus protocol and cautions. The routine, in other words, there's cautions when it comes to hibiscus tea, like I just hinted at with when it comes to women, but there's also a general caution. Daddy, you want to get into that, like how many cups you should have, and then also how it relates to certain like aspirins or Tylenol.
Yeah, if you're on Tylenol, um, you have to be very careful because it can reduce the medical effectiveness of it. So you have to space your consumption accordingly. Um, but it's low in potassium, making it entirely safe for people who have advanced kidney disease. So if you have advanced kidney disease, hibiscus tea is fine. Okay.
Confirm it
So
is fine with your doctor. Yeah.
right, but you confirm that. Obviously, you take all of this information and run it by your nephrologist, so that you not understand what we're saying. Because there are going to be exceptions. I mean, let's cut to the chase. It depends on where you are on the spectrum of health. There will be exceptions. I mean that you may be taking some medication that you can't take with hibiscus tea, so you have to talk to your doctor about this. As Stacey said, if you're a woman, you could have some issues with hibiscus tea.
Right. In other words, know your numbers. We're here to inform you. Like we just said, this is low in potassium. So, this is information you can now share with your doctor and say, hey, I just learned this from the Brewer Report regarding hibiscus tea. It's low in potassium, but do you see anything else that could disrupt my or any medication you're giving me? And, those are things you can perhaps say to your doctor. You go to your doctor with the information.
Absolutely. I mean, everything we're telling you has to be run through that filter with your physician. Because I'll be honest with you, we've had friends who said, okay, fine, we like your recipes, we like your smoothies, we like all of that. And then all of a sudden, if you run their prescriptions, and then all of a sudden you find out that what was good for them without the prescription is not good for them with the prescription because it could be what we call a contraindication with that prescription. Now the goal is to get off the prescription, but it's that's the way it world rolls. I mean, for example, we talk about natto beans all the time, but natto beans, if you're on blood thinners, you can't take natto beans. You can't eat that. because it's going to have a double thinning effect on your blood.
Right. That's why, we're preaching this plant-based diet, or at least majority plant-based, because like we've said, we are not vegans, we are not strictly plant-based, but if you can have majority plant-based diet, perhaps you won't get to the point where you would be on these medications or prescriptions, or you can get to the point where you can get off of them and you can deal more with nature's medicine, which would be things like hibiscus tea, and as we mentioned, like kiwis in the past, which was like nature's multivitamins, things like that. That's where you want to head. So we have flushing the toxins and protecting your flow. Water seems to be key as well.
Yes, thank you to tell them how much water that is.
So you have 1.5 to 2 liters of water daily you need to aim for. For consistent hydration provides the physical volume necessary for kidneys to efficiently flush out sodium and metabolic toxins.
Absolutely. Water and more water. Okay. Remember, your kidneys are a filter system. So you need to keep them flushed. Okay. That's why it's and what are you flushing? Sodium and metabolic toxins. And then the NSAIDs. Let's get into that.
Yes, go
That's
ahead.
the long-term or frequent use of over-the-counter, in other words, pain relievers like ibuprofen and naproxen, severely restrict blood flow to the kidneys. So, to ensure your good renal health into your 80s, I'm getting there. 2 months, hopefully, God willing. In 3 months, I'll be the big 80. These medications must be minimized or avoided entirely. Again, talk to your doctor. Okay, talk to your doctor. But this is what the science says. So, but talk to your doctor. If you got to have some pain relievers, then you all have to negotiate that with your doctors.
Yes, and now for our wrap up, we have the Brewer. Sometimes it's hard for me to say my own last name. The Brewer Kidney Longevity Blueprint. Step one,
Yes,
optimize your protein. Target the zero point 0.8 gram to kilogram sweet spot. Shift toward plant forward sources, beans, lentils, to dramatically reduce the metabolic acid workload. Remember, we mentioned that earlier.
then pivot to potassium. Okay, unless you're medically restricted. That's the key. Use that powerhouse five or that we talked about, or mainly those plants. If you're on a plant-based diet, you don't really don't have to worry about it except for potassium. If you have some potassium problems, then obviously you want to lower your potassium intake because you don't want to get hyperkalemia. And so, but the bottom line is you have to do that.
We just mentioned to hydrate 1.5 to 2 liters of water, which for some of you, you consume more 8-ounce glasses. That's about 6 to 8 of those. And integrating again 32 ounces of hibiscus tea to actively inhibit that ACE and prevent protein leakage.
Absolutely. And then, of course, capture sodium. Okay. Again, where's the sodium in our food supply? Ultra processed foods. Okay? Ultra processed foods is where we found a lot of sodium in our diet. So you want to do this as much as possible through home cooking or through, whole foods, plant-based foods, period. And of course, you have to consult with your doctor, but you got to strictly limit the use of the NSAIDs, and that's the ibuprofen and naproxen and all those painkillers. And that's of course really applies to people my age because I mean, Arthur's undefeated, and we know that. When you get up around 70, 80 years old, Arthur is undefeated. I know you got to kill some pain, but we use turmeric. Again, we use turmeric a lot to manage pain.
Yeah, turmeric, Gregor speaks on turmeric a lot. It's one of the highest anti inflammatory spices.
Right. Turmeric is in just about everything. A large percentage of the foods that I eat has turmeric, and with the black pepper and some kind fat like extra virgin olive oil so that you get the curcumin in there, which starts to reduce that pain.
Absolutely. All right. So that's our show for today. This was quite a long one, but it was a lot of information. So hopefully you have found it to be helpful. As always, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Share this information with your friends, your family. Share this information with your doctors, like we've always mentioned, so that they are informed with perhaps your new way of eating. And just make sure that it works well with whatever type of medications you may be on, or hopefully you're not on any medications. But any other words, Daddy?
No, I think one of the things that we found in talking to a lot of people who are asking us for advice, etc. One of the first things I say, what is your list of what is your list of prescriptions? And then I say, then we've actually run some of those lists through our diets and our protocol and found that hey, some of your prescriptions will contraindicate with some of these foods, or the foods will contraindicate or interfere with some of your prescription. When that happens, then we say, okay, now you need to go talk to your doctor because bottom line is that there are certain foods that will interfere with, your prescription. So our goal is very clear. We want to be off of prescription. My mother, my in-laws, all of them were low prescription people, okay? And they lived into their 90s into 100 because they were low prescription people, period. When you relying on food and no underlying conditions, no, low, your blood pressure is normal, your sugar levels are normal, etc. You you're halfway home right there, okay? You're halfway home because a lot of these prescription drugs are targeting those things.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to close. So definitely try to change your diet best you can to hopefully limit your prescriptions or to completely eliminate them. But that's our show for today. So until next time, peace.